Okay, so you've installed PyroCMS. Next thing we want to do is take a look at the application structure and see what some of these different directories do for us. To get started, let's take a look at the documentation. And again, we'll be using the PyroCMS section of the docs. And if we scroll down to structure, the first directory we'll take a look at is the add-ons directory. So if we hop over to our project, we close up some of this stuff. The add-ons directory by default comes empty. So this is a great place for putting custom add-ons that are specific to this project only. Things that you're not going to redistribute, things that are specific to the client's needs. For example, I would put the theme here, and if I have any kind of custom add-on that the client needs, I would also put it in here. This directory is not included in the git ignore, and so it will be committed to your project repository. If we take a look at the directory structure, it is add-ons followed by your application reference. And your application reference is the slug of your app in a multi-site environment for Pyro. By default, it might be default or whatever you define when installing PyroCMS. The next directory will be the vendor directory, and that will be very similar, if not the same, as your composer or packagist vendor slug. And this is because add-ons maintain a composer type structure. So we have that vendor directory in there to help us when using composer.json to manage our add-ons. And we do it here too, even though no add-ons within the add-ons directory will be included in the composer.json. And we'll get to that a little bit later. And the next directory will be all of the add-on directories, and those will be pretty much self-explanatory. They're the add-on slug followed by the type of the add-on. If you have add-ons that are shared between applications on a single PyroCMS installation, you can put them within add-ons/shared and then include your vendor directory and then of course the add-on directory thereafter. The app directory is very, very similar, if not the same, as a native Laravel application, with the exception that the console kernel and the HTTP kernel are not used. On top of that, the user class is not used because we bind that to our users module by default. The kernels are overridden in order to provide some additional features, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Other than that, you can place any random services or controllers or classes that you need in here. Pyro suggests and encourages encapsulating your logic into add-ons, but if it doesn't fit in an add-on, this is a perfect place to put it, slap it in there, and be done with it. The next directory we'll take a look at is the Bootstrap Directory. And again, this is almost exactly the same as a Laravel installation. The app.php directory, or file rather, is the only file that is modified. And you can see this is where we bind our own kernels to the HTTP and console kernel. This is helpful, for example, with HTTP, we can automatically detect the app locale based on subdomain or URI prefixes. And we can also, in the case of using Artisan, we can target a specific application in a multi-site environment by passing along a global option. And we can only do that by overriding or extending the kernel for both HTTP and the console. Moving on, we've got the config directory, and again, this is exactly the same as your native Laravel installation. The only difference here is the twig bridge configuration that comes with streams, and then also the streams.php configuration file. And this is where we can define additional service providers and singleton bindings, add-on bindings, additional commands, schedules, and some middleware in here as well. That are registered where we would normally put them in the kernels. We can put them here instead, and they're booted up and registered just like they normally would be. In this case, we don't have access to the kernel, so this is kind of an easy way to register additional things that don't, again, fit within an add-on. The next directory we'll take a look at is the core directory. And the core directory contains all of the add-ons that are required by the composer.json file. By default, this is all of Pyro's core add-ons, field types and modules and extensions, what have you. Anything that's required by the composer.json file will be placed within the core add-on directory. And if you add your own add-ons in here, be it from a private VCS repository or through Composer's, like Packagist, if they're included in the composer.json, they will be placed in the core directory. That's basically saying this project requires these add-ons, so that's a good thing to know. The next, the database directory, and that is exactly the same as any old Laravel installations database directory. The next is the public directory, and again, very similar to Laravel, nearly identical with the exception that Pyro will put all of the compiled assets as well as some volatile field type and module output files, cache files, or template views, things like that will all be put in here. Assets that need to be made publicly available will be put in here. The assets directory is where you will find your compiled assets from various modules and the asset collection, which we'll get into later. And this is prefixed or separated out by your application reference. So if you have multiple applications running on the same installation of Pyro, you'll see multiple folders here named after their application. Next directory we'll take a look at is the resources directory. And again, this is very similar to a native Laravel application. One thing that you will notice is the streams directory. And this is where the resources directory is used to override configuration, translation files, and views from core add-ons or third-party add-ons or package, in this case the streams platform package from the vendor directory. They can be overridden here so that you don't have to tamper with the core, the dependency files. So in this case, Pyro out of the box has a custom add-on configuration that eager loads a couple add-ons and also defers a couple of them to get the behavior that we're after. It's got some distribution stuff and then defaults the themes out of the box to some PyroCMS themes. Nothing major here, but it's important to note that you can override the streams configuration here. So for example, if we were to publish an add-on, let's publish the users module. We can come back and take a look at our resources directory and notice that it created a default directory. And this is again named after our application reference. You'll see different folders for different application references in the same PyroCMS installation. And if we open it up, we see add-ons, our vendor directory, and then the add-on directory, and we'll see configuration, language files, and views. And these can be overridden at will, and they will be recursively merged into the add-ons configuration, language, and views. So for example, if we wanted to change a configuration file, let's say we wanted to change the breadcrumb for login to something else, when we view the page that this breadcrumb is actually used in, we will see that the translation has been updated or overridden from here. That way we don't have to touch the users module, we don't have to touch any of that stuff. Views are the same way. You can override the views here and do anything you want with them. One thing to note is if the view includes, if it uses the twig include clause, it will not look for the view here. It will actually look for the add-on view. And so what you'll want to do is just update and use the correct view path, and we'll get into that later as well. And then configuration, again, if we want to change configuration to, let's see here, looks like username is a valid option. And then let's say we want to delete the rest. Only the login configuration value is going to be updated or overridden, and everything else that the add-on declares as configuration will be left alone. In this case, we're only overwriting this value, and we can go ahead and delete these. And you can kind of tamper with or configure the add-ons remotely from afar this way without, again, having to tamper with the core add-ons and messing with dependencies. So if we take a look at the next directory, we've got routes. This is an interesting directory. The web routes here are the very first routes loaded, and it's important because in Laravel, it's first come, last come, first serve. So if this exact route gets defined elsewhere later in the booting cycle, this is the very first routing file that's loaded. So let's say an add-on, for example, the pages module routes the same path here, just the home path or the base URI. This will not be used. The pages module is going to be overriding that. And so keep that in mind when you're defining routes here. If you're just setting up like temporary build views or something to test out or something that's not included in an add-on, this is a great place for it. But keep in mind that this will be overridden down the line as add-ons load up and override routes are loaded if it comes across the same path. So this will be overridden, but feel free to put routes here if they're not going to collide with anything down the road. Let's see, the storage directory. The storage directory is, again, very similar to Laravel. One difference here is the streams directory within it. And this is where the application will store generated models for different streams. It will store output files for the editor field type, markdown field type, and the what you see is what you get field type. These are just kind of volatile files. Again, they're not something that's committed to your repository. They're something that can change and they get dumped and reloaded as the project changes or as users change values of different field types and create streams and modify them. So this is just good to know where those things are because, for example, if you change the layout for, let's see, this is a page type layout. If you change this, it's automatically synced into Pyro. You don't have to worry about syncing views or anything like that or working within the field type necessarily. If you change this, it'll update your database and you can see reflections that you're making here, live. Basically, you don't have to sync files or anything like that. So it's really nice being able to work with these files in your IDE rather than having to work through the field type and then sync and then do all that malarkey. And let's see here. The vendor directory contains all of your composer dependencies. This is pretty straightforward. If you've ever used Laravel before, you know exactly what this does. One important directory is the Anomaly Directory. You'll be looking through the streams platform quite a bit if you're trying to explore how things work, and we'll go into this later too, kind of showing you how different streams platform services work, how they provide things, how they interact with your application, what they do, where they are, stuff like that. So this is kind of an important directory. It's good to know where it's at. It's good to know why it's here. This is basically the engine for PyroCMS. Anything that you see guaranteed loads a handful of files from the streams platform, and in order to be able to do whatever the module is doing. If you load a page, it's using this. If you load a control panel page, all the UI and tables and forms are all built using the streams platform. And looks like that's it. From there, you've got your composer.json file, and feel free to modify that as you need. One thing to note here, some of the PyroCMS add-ons will be paid, or maybe you have a private repository of your own. You can still load add-ons that you create using Composer VCS repositories. And if you take a look at, getcomposer.com. Oh, no, that's not it. Yes, leave. getcomposer.org. If you take a look at their documentation, and let's see, repositories, and for example, GitHub, if you want to use a private add-on of mine, or if you have a private add-on of your own and you're not familiar with this already, this is a good thing to know how to pull in a private GitHub repository using Composer. So keep this in mind when you're building things. You don't have to make things public. If it's something internal, you don't have to put it in the add-ons directory and commit it to the project. You can still use Composer to control those private dependencies. And that's about it. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll continue on later.